Sometimes the most unexpected acts of compassion can change the course of history itself. This is the incredible story of how one man's simple kindness at a roadside gas station connected him to the most powerful family in America. When a single father encountered a desperate pregnant soldier that everyone else had turned away, he made a choice that would alter multiple destinies forever. What started as offering shelter to a woman with nowhere to go became a bond that would span decades and reach the highest levels of government. You're about to witness how a moment of human decency in a small-town gas station led to the birth of someone who would become the president's grandson. This story will restore your faith in the power of kindness and show that sometimes helping a stranger can literally change the world. Prepare for a journey proving destiny works in extraordinary ways. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The October wind carried the scent of fallen leaves and diesel fuel across the parking lot of Oakville Gas and Go, where Gideon Stone was finishing his evening shift. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the cracked asphalt as the last of the dinner rush traffic disappeared down Highway 89. At 42, Gideon had learned to find peace in the rhythm of small-town life, the predictable flow of commuters, truckers, and locals who stopped by his family's gas station. The station had been in the Stone family for 3 generations, passed down from his grandfather, who built it with his own hands in 1962. What started as a simple 2-pump operation had evolved into a full-service station with a small convenience store, mechanic bay, and the kind of reputation that kept customers coming back. Gideon's father had run it until his death 5 years ago, and now it was Gideon's turn to carry on the legacy. Though he'd never imagined he'd be doing it alone. The bell above the door chimed as he locked up the cash register. But it was just the wind pushing against the glass. These quiet moments had become precious to him, brief interludes between the chaos of running a business and the equally demanding job of single parenthood. His hands, permanently stained with motor oil despite his best efforts, moved through the closing routine with practiced efficiency. Check the pumps, secure the register, set the alarm, lock the doors. The station sat at the crossroads of 3 major highways, making it a natural stopping point for travelers heading to the state capital, tourists visiting the nearby national forest, or military personnel traveling between bases. Over the years, Gideon had seen every kind of person imaginable pass through those glass doors. Executives in expensive suits, families packed into minivans for vacation, truckers on their cross-country routes, and young soldiers either heading to their first deployment or coming home from their last. Tonight felt different somehow, though Gideon couldn't put his finger on why. The autumn air seemed to carry an electric tension, as if the universe was holding its breath for something significant to happen. He'd learned to trust these instincts over the years, the same sixth sense that had kept him alive during his brief stint as a volunteer firefighter. And that now helped him read the subtle signs that told him when a customer was in real trouble versus just having a bad day. As he walked toward his pickup truck in the employee parking area, Gideon's thoughts turned to home. 12-year-old Tyler would be finishing his homework at the kitchen table, probably sneaking glances at his phone when he thought no one was looking. The boy was growing up too fast, already showing signs of the teenage independence that both thrilled and terrified his father. Tyler had been only 7 when his mother left, walking out with nothing but a suitcase and a note saying she couldn't handle this life anymore. The abandonment had shattered something fundamental in Gideon's understanding of the world. He'd thought they were happy, not perfect, but solid. The gas station provided a decent living. They had a comfortable home in town, and Tyler was thriving in school. But Sarah had seen only limitations where Gideon saw stability, only small-town suffocation where he saw community and belonging. Her departure had taught him that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones most likely to disappear when life gets complicated. The parking lot was nearly empty now, save for a few cars belonging to the night shift workers at the manufacturing plant down the road. Gideon paused beside his truck, keys in hand, taking in the familiar sight of his domain. The red and white Stone's Gas and Go sign glowed against the darkening sky, a beacon for travelers seeking fuel, snacks, or just a moment's rest on their journeys to somewhere else. He'd built a good life here in Oakville. Population 8,200. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work that served his community. The gas station was more than just a business. It was a gathering place where locals caught up on gossip, where stranded motorists found help, and where Gideon had quietly built a reputation as someone who could be counted on in a crisis. Whether it was letting someone use the phone when their car broke down, extending credit to a regular customer going through hard times, or simply offering a listening ear to a traveler far from home, Gideon had learned that small acts of kindness often meant more than grand gestures. The sound of a car engine sputtering broke through his reverie. Gideon looked up to see an older sedan pulling into the station, its engine coughing and wheezing like a dying animal. The car was moving slowly, cautiously, as if the driver wasn't sure it would make it to the pumps. Something about the vehicle's desperate approach triggered Gideon's protective instincts, the same feeling he got when he spotted a customer counting out exact change from a nearly empty wallet, or when someone asked about the cheapest gas option. With genuine worry in their voice, as the sedan finally wheezed to a stop at pump number 3, Gideon could see through the windshield that the driver was a young woman, her hands gripping the steering wheel as if it were a lifeline. Even from a distance, something about her posture suggested exhaustion, desperation, and the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from being on the road too long with nowhere safe to land. Gideon had seen enough people in crisis to recognize the signs, and every instinct told him that whatever brought this woman to his gas station on this particular October evening was about to change everything. He just didn't know yet how dramatically his own definition of everything was about to expand. Gideon Stone had learned to read people the way meteorologists read storm patterns, by watching for the subtle signs that preceded dramatic change. Growing up as the son of a gas station owner in Oakville had given him a front-row seat to human nature in all its forms. Customers revealed themselves in how they treated minimum-wage employees, in whether they cleaned up their spills, and in the stories they told while waiting for their tanks to fill. But it was the loss of his wife Sarah that had truly taught him to recognize desperation in others. The months leading up to her departure had been filled with signs he'd missed or chosen to ignore. The way she'd stare out the kitchen window as if searching for escape routes, her increasing irritation with the rhythms of small-town life, and the growing distance in her voice when she talked about the future. When she finally left, Gideon realized he'd been so focused on maintaining their routine that he'd failed to see how trapped she felt within it. The worst part wasn't even the abandonment itself, it was the note she'd left explaining that she'd never wanted this small life, and couldn't pretend anymore that it was enough. 20 years of marriage, and he'd apparently never known what she actually wanted. The revelation had shattered his confidence in his ability to truly understand the people he cared about most. Tyler had taken the abandonment even harder, though he'd tried to hide it behind the stoic facade that 12-year-old boys think makes them look tough. For months after Sarah left, Tyler would ask when she was coming home, as if her departure was just an extended vacation rather than a permanent choice. Gideon had struggled to find the right words to explain something he didn't understand himself. How do you tell your son that his mother chose to leave both of you behind without making him wonder what was wrong with him that made her want to go? The questions had eventually stopped, but Tyler's wariness around new people had intensified. He'd become fiercely protective of their small family unit, suspicious of anyone who showed too much interest in his father, and determined to prove that they didn't need anyone else to be complete. Gideon understood the impulse, he felt it too. But he also worried that his son was learning to view emotional investment as a dangerous gamble rather than a natural part of human connection. Running. The gas station had become both sanctuary and prison for Gideon. The work was familiar and manageable, requiring the kind of practical problem-solving skills he'd inherited from his father and grandfather. Engines broke down in logical ways that could be diagnosed and repaired. Cash registers balanced at the end of each day. Inventory could be tracked and managed with precision. It was the human element that remained unpredictable and potentially dangerous. His father, Harold Stone, had built the business on relationships as much as reliability. Harold had known every regular customer by name, remembered their families and their troubles, and had never hesitated to extend credit or help to those in need. "People remember how you treat them when they're down," Harold used to say. "That's what builds loyalty that lasts generations." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But Harold had also been married to the same woman for 45 years, had raised 3 sons who all stayed in town, and had died surrounded by a community that genuinely mourned his passing. Gideon's life had taken a different trajectory, marked by loss and abandonment rather than steady accumulation of connection and belonging. The gas station itself reflected both the family's history and Gideon's current limitations. The building was well maintained but showed its age, with vintage signage that customers found charming and mechanical equipment that required constant attention to keep running. The attached convenience store carried all the essentials plus a selection of local products that Harold had insisted on supporting: honey from the Johnson farm, jerky made by a veteran who'd started his business after returning from overseas, and coffee roasted by a local cafe that had been struggling to compete with the national chains. Gideon had kept all of his father's traditions, while adding a few of his own. He'd expanded the mechanic services to include basic car maintenance, knowing that many of his customers couldn't afford the higher prices charged by the dealerships in the county seat. He'd also started staying open later to accommodate the shift workers at the manufacturing plant, even though the late hours meant less time with Tyler. The balance between providing for his son and being present for him had become Gideon's greatest challenge. Tyler was at an age where he needed guidance and attention, but also craved independence and respect for his growing maturity. Some evenings when Gideon finally made it home from the station, he'd find Tyler already asleep, homework completed and dinner dishes washed, a level of self-sufficiency that impressed and worried him in equal measure. Their morning routine had become sacred ground for their relationship. Tyler would wake up early to have breakfast with his father before school, and they'd spend 30 minutes talking about everything from homework assignments to current events to Tyler's dreams of maybe becoming an engineer someday. These conversations were when Gideon felt most successful as a parent, when he could see glimpses of the thoughtful, compassionate young man his son was becoming despite the challenges they'd faced. Tyler had his mother's intelligence and his grandfather's mechanical aptitude, but he'd developed his own unique perspective on the world. He was fascinated by how things worked, not just mechanically but socially and politically. He'd ask questions about why some customers treated Gideon with respect while others seemed to look down on him, or why certain politicians made promises they never intended to keep. "Do you ever think about leaving here?" Tyler had asked just last week, the question catching Gideon off guard. "Do you want to leave?" Gideon had responded, uncertain whether the question reflected his son's desires or fears. "Not really," Tyler had said thoughtfully. "But I wonder sometimes if Mom was right about this place being too small for big dreams." The question had haunted Gideon because it revealed how much Tyler was still processing his mother's departure and the implicit criticism of their life that her leaving represented. Gideon wanted his son to feel free to pursue whatever future called to him, but he also wanted Tyler to understand that there was dignity and value in the life they'd built in AKV. As Gideon watched the struggling sedan at Pump 3, he realized that his approach to new people had become cautiously defensive over the past 5 years. He'd help anyone in genuine need. That was both his nature and his father's legacy, but he'd stopped allowing strangers to become anything more than temporary interactions. The risk of emotional investment had come to feel too dangerous too, likely to end in disappointment or abandonment. But something about the woman in the car was triggering a different response, a recognition that transcended his carefully constructed emotional barriers. Maybe it was the way she sat so still after the engine died, as if gathering courage for whatever came next. Maybe it was the subtle signs of someone carrying more weight than any single person should have to bear alone. Whatever it was, Gideon found himself walking toward the car before making a conscious decision to do so. Driven by an instinct that felt both familiar and dangerous, the same impulse that had led him to become a volunteer firefighter, to take over the family business, and to commit himself completely to single parenthood, despite having no roadmap. For success, the most important thing in Gideon Stone's life sat 12 miles away at a kitchen table, probably struggling with algebra homework and wondering when his father would finally make it home. Tyler represented everything Gideon had left to lose, and everything worth protecting. The boy had already endured one parent walking away. Gideon was determined that he would never experience the second abandonment that would leave him truly alone in the world. This responsibility shaped every decision Gideon made, from the hours he kept at the gas station to the people he allowed into their lives. Tyler needed stability more than anything else, predictable routines, reliable income, and the security of knowing that his father would always be there when he needed him. Gideon had built their life around these principles, even when it meant sacrificing spontaneity or personal desires that might compromise Tyler's sense of safety. The morning routine that anchored their relationship had taken months to establish after Sarah left. Initially, Tyler had refused breakfast, claiming he wasn't hungry while his stomach audibly disagreed. He'd been afraid that if he enjoyed anything too much, it might disappear the way his mother had. Gideon had persisted with patient consistency, making the same offer every morning until Tyler finally accepted that some things could be counted on to remain constant. Now, their breakfast conversations were the highlight of Gideon's day. Tyler would share his thoughts about school, friends, or whatever book he was reading, and Gideon would get glimpses of the remarkable young man his son was becoming. Tyler had developed a curiosity about the world that amazed his father. He'd ask about everything from local politics to international news to the mechanics of space travel, processing information with a maturity that sometimes made Gideon forget. He was talking to a 12-year-old. "Mr. Patterson says I should consider applying for the State Science Academy when I'm older," Tyler had mentioned just last month. "It's a boarding school for kids who want to study engineering and technology." The comment had filled Gideon with pride and terror in equal measure. Pride because Tyler was clearly exceptional in ways that even his teachers recognized. Terror because the suggestion implied that Tyler's potential might require leaving Oakville, and by extension, leaving him. "What do you think about that?" Gideon had asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "I don't know," Tyler had replied honestly. "I like learning new things, but I don't want to go away. What if something happened and you needed me?" The response had broken Gideon's heart because it revealed how much Tyler had absorbed the lesson that people you love can disappear without warning. At 12 years old, Tyler was already limiting his own dreams to avoid the risk of separation. Gideon realized he needed to find a way to encourage his son's ambitions while also reassuring him that their family bond was strong enough to survive distance and change. The financial pressures of single parenthood added another layer of complexity to Gideon's decision-making. The gas station provided a decent living, but not an abundant one. Every major purchase required careful consideration, and unexpected expenses like the time Tyler broke his arm skateboarding or when the station's main pump required emergency repairs could strain their budget for months. Gideon had started setting aside money for Tyler's college education, even though it meant driving a 10-year-old truck and postponing maintenance on their house. He'd also been quietly researching scholarship opportunities and academic programs that might help Tyler pursue his interests without accumulating crushing debt. The boy's intelligence was already opening doors that Gideon had never imagined walking through, and he was determined not to let financial limitations constrain his son's possibilities. The health insurance situation was a constant source of worry. The policy Gideon carried through the Small Business Association was adequate for routine care, but he lived in fear of a serious illness or injury that could bankrupt them. He'd seen too many families in their community forced to choose between medical care and financial survival, and the thought of being unable to provide for Tyler's needs kept him awake many nights. The gas station itself represented both security and vulnerability for their family. It generated steady income and provided a clear path for Gideon to be present in Tyler's life, but it also tied their financial future to a single business in a small town with limited economic diversity. If the manufacturing plant ever closed, or if the highway department rerouted traffic away from Oakville, their livelihood could disappear virtually overnight. Gideon had been exploring ways to diversify their income stream, considering everything from expanding the mechanic services to adding a small restaurant to the station. But every potential change carried risks that made him hesitate. What if an expansion failed and left them worse off than before? What if taking on debt to grow the business compromised their current stability? Tyler's social development had become another area of concern for Gideon. The boy was popular with his classmates and well-liked by his teachers, but he'd become increasingly reluctant to form close friendships. He seemed to understand instinctively that emotional attachments created vulnerability, and he'd developed strategies for maintaining distance even while appearing socially engaged. "Tyler's a great kid," his teacher had told Gideon during the last parent conference. "He's helpful, intelligent, and mature for his age. But I worry that he doesn't let anyone get too close. He seems to be protecting himself from something." The observation had confirmed Gideon's own fears about how Sarah's departure was affecting Tyler's ability to trust others. The boy had learned to be self-sufficient to an extraordinary degree, but self-sufficiency taken too far could become isolation. Gideon wanted Tyler to understand that while some people might leave, others were worth the risk of caring about. The question of whether to date again had become increasingly relevant as Tyler grew older and more curious about adult relationships. Gideon had received interest from several women in town. The librarian who always smiled when he brought Tyler to the book club meetings, the nurse who worked at Tyler's pediatrician's office, the new teacher who'd started volunteering at the fire department's community events. But every potential relationship carried the risk of another abandonment that would devastate Tyler just as he was beginning to heal from the first one. Gideon had decided that his son's emotional well-being took precedence over his own desire for companionship. Better to remain safely single than to risk introducing another person who might decide that their small-town life wasn't enough. This calculation had served them well for 5 years, creating the stability that Tyler needed to thrive academically and emotionally. Their life was modest but secure, predictable but fulfilling. Gideon had learned to find satisfaction in Tyler's achievements and in the quiet respect he'd earned from his community. It wasn't the life he'd originally envisioned, but it was a good life, honest, purposeful, and built on the kind of solid foundation that could support Tyler's dreams whatever direction they might take. As he approached the sedan with its struggling engine and desperate driver, Gideon carried all of these considerations with him. His first instinct was always to help someone in need, but his second instinct was to protect Tyler from any situation that might threaten their carefully constructed stability. The tension between compassion and caution had become the defining characteristic of his approach to the world. But something about this particular moment felt different. as if the usual calculations didn't apply. The woman in the car looked like she was carrying the kind of weight that Gideon recognized from his own experience. The exhaustion that comes from being solely responsible for someone else's welfare. The desperation of having nowhere safe to turn. Maybe it was projection, or maybe it was genuine intuition. But Gideon sensed that whatever crisis had brought this stranger to his gas station was about to test every principle he'd developed about maintaining safe distance from other people's problems. And despite all his careful planning and protective instincts, he found himself walking toward a situation that felt both inevitable and potentially life-changing. The sedan's engine gave one final, rattling cough before dying completely, leaving an unusual silence in the gas station's parking lot. Gideon could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead and the distant rumble of trucks on the highway as he approached the car. Through the windshield, he could see the woman's shoulders shaking, whether from cold, exhaustion, or something more serious he couldn't tell. As he got closer, more details became visible. The car was at least 15 years old, with rust spots around the wheel wells and a rear bumper held on with duct tape. Military decals were visible on the back window, Marine Corps insignia, and a Purple Heart sticker that immediately commanded Gideon's respect. The license plate was from 3 states away, suggesting this was more than just a local breakdown. Gideon tapped gently on the driver's side window, careful not to startle the occupant. The woman looked up and he was struck by how young she appeared, probably mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun and the kind of posture that spoke of military training. Her face was pale and drawn, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested she'd been driving for a very long time, but it was her condition that stopped him short. Even through the car window, it was obvious that she was heavily pregnant, so pregnant that she had to lean back from the steering wheel to accommodate her rounded belly. The combination of her military bearing, obvious exhaustion, and advanced pregnancy created a picture that triggered every protective instinct Gideon possessed. She rolled down the window with obvious effort, the manual crank protesting with each turn. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse from either crying or shouting. "I know you're closed. My car died, and I don't know what to do." "It's okay," Gideon said immediately, his tone gentle but authoritative. "I'm Gideon Stone. I own this place. Let me take a look at your engine, see what we're dealing with." The woman nodded gratefully, reaching for the hood release. As she struggled to get out of the car, Gideon could see that she was farther along in her pregnancy than he'd initially realized, probably 8 months, if he had to guess. The military uniform she wore was clearly a maternity version, altered to accommodate her changing shape. "I'm Elodie Vance," she said, extending a hand that trembled slightly. "Staff sergeant, actually, or I was until..." She trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging in the cooling evening air. Gideon shook her hand, noting the firm grip despite her obvious distress. "Military?" he asked, nodding toward her uniform. "Marines," she confirmed. "Just finished my service. Or rather, my service finished me." There was bitter humor in her voice, the kind that comes from laughing to keep from crying. As Gideon lifted the hood and peered into the engine compartment, Elodie leaned against the car's front fender, one hand on her lower back and the other supporting her belly. The engine bay was cleaner than he'd expected for such an old car, suggesting she'd been trying to maintain it despite obvious financial constraints. "When's the last time this thing had a tune-up?" Gideon asked, checking the oil level and examining the battery connections. "About 6 months ago, right before I got out," Elodie replied. "I've been trying to make it last until..." She stopped again, as if unsure how much to reveal to a stranger. Gideon straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag he kept in his back pocket. "Until the baby comes?" he guessed gently. Elodie nodded, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "I was trying to get to my sister's place in Oregon. She said I could stay with her until I figured things out." But the car's been acting up for the last 100 miles, and now. She gestured helplessly at the silent engine. How far along are you? Gideon asked, his concern shifting from mechanical to medical. 34 weeks, Elodie said. The baby's not due for another 6 weeks, but I've been having some contractions today. Probably just from stress and sitting in the car too long. Gideon's alarm bells began ringing. He'd been present when Tyler was born, and he remembered the midwife explaining that stress could trigger premature labor. A pregnant woman, alone on the road, obviously upset and physically uncomfortable, was a medical emergency waiting to happen. You having contractions now? He asked, his voice taking on the calm authority he'd learned as a volunteer firefighter. Elodie started to shake her head, then winced and placed both hands on her belly. Just pressure. It's probably nothing. But, as Gideon watched, he could see her breathing become more deliberate, the way women breathed through contractions. The timing was too coincidental: car breakdown, obvious stress, and now possible labor signs in a woman who was 6 weeks early and hundreds of miles from her destination. Elodie, he said carefully, I think we need to get you to a hospital. There's one about 20 minutes from here. I don't have insurance, she said immediately. I mean, I have some coverage through the VA, but it's complicated. And I don't have money for an emergency room visit. Gideon recognized the panic in her voice, the same panic he'd felt when Tyler had broken his arm. And Gideon had to calculate whether they could afford the emergency room, or if they should wait for the regular clinic to open. Medical bills could destroy a family's financial stability in a matter of hours. We'll figure that out later, Gideon said firmly. Right now we need to make sure you and the baby are okay. Okay. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and Elodie gripped the car's fender with white knuckles. When it passed, she looked up at Gideon with fear in her eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen like this, she whispered. I had a plan. I was going to stay with my sister, find a job, save money for when the baby came. Everything was supposed to be organized and safe. Gideon understood that feeling, the desperation of trying to control circumstances that seemed determined to spiral beyond your ability to manage them. He'd felt the same way when Sarah left, when Tyler's medical bills piled up, when the gas station's main pump had failed during the busiest week of summer. Plans change, he said gently. That doesn't mean everything's going to fall apart. As if summoned by his words, another car pulled into the station, a pickup truck with 2 men who looked like they'd been drinking. They approached the pumps with the loud confidence of people who'd had just enough alcohol to make them feel invincible, but not enough to obviously impair their driving. Hey, one of them called out, you open or what? Gideon glanced toward the men, then back at Elodie, who had tensed visibly at the sound of raised voices. Something about her reaction suggested this wasn't just normal caution around strangers. There was a specific fear there, the kind that came from experience with people who might pose a threat. I'll be right back, Gideon told her quietly. Stay here. As he walked toward the pickup truck, Gideon's mind was racing through calculations. Elodie was obviously in distress, possibly in premature labor, and definitely in need of help. But she was also a stranger with what appeared to be a complicated situation, no insurance, no local connections, and reactions that suggested she might be running from something more serious than just financial problems. The responsible thing would be to call an ambulance, get her to professional medical care, and let the proper authorities handle whatever crisis had brought her to his gas station. But something about her desperation reminded him too much of his own darkest moments, the times when he'd needed help, but had been too proud or too afraid to ask for it. We're closed, he told the men at the pickup truck, his tone polite but firm. Pumps shut down at 9. Come on, man, the driver said, swaying slightly. We just need gas to get home. There's another station about 5 miles down the highway, Gideon replied. They're open all night. The men grumbled but got back in their truck, leaving Gideon alone with Elodie and a decision that felt like it would define who he was as a person. He could maintain safe distance, offer minimal help, and protect the stable life he'd built for Tyler. Or he could step fully into someone else's crisis and risk everything he'd worked to achieve. As he walked back toward Elodie, another contraction hit her, stronger and longer than the previous ones. When it passed, she looked up at him with a mixture of fear and determination that reminded him of Tyler when he was trying to be brave about something that terrified him. "I think," Elodie said quietly, "I think the baby might be coming sooner than I planned." And in that moment, Gideon realized that all his careful calculations about maintaining distance and protecting Tyler were about to be overwhelmed by a simple truth. Sometimes helping another person is more important than protecting yourself. The question wasn't whether he would help Elodie. He'd already made that decision the moment he saw her desperation. The question was how far he was willing to go, and what he was prepared to risk, to make sure both she and her baby survived the night. When the next contraction hit Elodie with enough force to double her over, Gideon abandoned all thoughts of maintaining careful distance. This wasn't about protecting his carefully constructed life anymore. This was about preventing a potential tragedy that was unfolding in real time right in front of him. "Okay," he said with calm authority, moving to support Elodie's arm. "We're not making it to the hospital. My truck is right here. I'm going to get you somewhere safe where we can call for medical help." "I can't afford an ambulance," Elodie protested, even as she gripped his arm for support. "And I don't know anyone here. I don't have anywhere to go." "You have somewhere to go," Gideon said firmly. "You're coming home with me. My house is 10 minutes away, and my son Tyler is there. We'll call emergency services from there if we need to, but first let's get you off this parking lot." The decision surprised him even as he made it. Everything about his post-Sarah life had been built around avoiding exactly this kind of situation. Bringing a stranger into his home, exposing Tyler to uncertainty, risking their stability for someone else's crisis. But watching Elodie struggle through another contraction, obviously alone and terrified, had triggered something deeper than his protective instincts. "I can't impose like that," Elodie said, though her voice lacked conviction. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you're a Marine," Gideon replied, helping her toward his pickup truck. "I know you're pregnant and in distress. And I know you need help that I can provide. That's enough for now." As he helped Elodie into the passenger seat of his truck, Gideon found himself moving with the kind of decisive competence he hadn't felt since the early days of his volunteer firefighter service. All the hesitation and calculation that had characterized his approach to new people over the past 5 years seemed to evaporate in the face of genuine emergency. The drive to his house took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Elodie breathed through 2 more contractions during the trip, each one stronger and closer together than the last. Gideon kept up a steady stream of calm conversation, asking about her military service and sharing details about life in Oakville, anything to keep her focused on something other than the pain. "I was stationed at Camp Pendleton," Elodie managed between contractions. "Did 2 deployments overseas. Never thought I'd end up having my baby in the middle of nowhere with a complete stranger." "You're not in the middle of nowhere," Gideon corrected gently. "You're in Oakville, and you're with someone who's going to make sure you and your baby are safe. Sometimes that's how life works. The people who are supposed to help you aren't there, and the people who are there become the ones who matter." When they pulled into Gideon's driveway, Tyler appeared in the front window, clearly curious about why his father was bringing home a passenger. Gideon could see the boy's face cycling through confusion, concern, and something that might have been excitement at this break from their normal routine. "Tyler," Gideon called as he helped Elodie out of the truck. "I need your help. We have a medical situation." To his credit, Tyler responded immediately, opening the front door and helping to clear a path as Gideon guided Elodie into the house. The boy's eyes widened when he saw how pregnant Elodie was. But he didn't ask questions, just moved quickly to help however he could. "Should I call 911? Tyler asked, his voice calm but alert. "Not yet," Gideon replied. "Let's get Elodie settled first and see what we're dealing with." The living room suddenly felt like a medical triage area as Gideon helped Elodie onto the couch. Tyler brought pillows and a glass of water without being asked, his natural helpfulness emerging despite the unusual circumstances. Gideon found himself proud of his son's mature response to an unexpected crisis. "I'm Tyler," the boy said to Elodie, offering her the water. "My dad's really good in emergencies. He used to be a volunteer firefighter." "I'm Elodie," she replied, accepting the water gratefully. "Thank you for helping. I know this must be strange for you." "Not really," Tyler said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd learned to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. "Dad always says we help people who need it. That's what families do." A simple statement hit Gideon with unexpected force. Without realizing it, Tyler had just articulated the principle that had guided Gideon's decision to bring Elodie home, not the careful calculation of risks and benefits, but the fundamental belief that family meant being there for people who needed you, even if they weren't technically family yet. Another contraction gripped Elodie, this one lasting nearly a minute and leaving her breathing hard when it passed. Gideon timed it carefully, noting that they were now coming every 4 minutes and increasing in intensity. "Elodie," he said gently, "I think we need to seriously consider that this baby is coming tonight. Are you okay with me calling my friend Sandra? She's a nurse at the county hospital, and she lives about 10 minutes away." "I don't want to cause trouble for anyone else," Elodie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This is all wrong. I was supposed to have everything figured out before the baby came." Tyler moved closer to the couch, his expression serious beyond his years. "My mom left when I was 7, he said quietly. "Dad didn't have everything figured out either, but we learned that sometimes having a plan isn't as important as having people who care about you." The wisdom in Tyler's words stunned both adults into silence. Here was a 12-year-old boy offering comfort to a stranger, based on his own experience with family disruption and unexpected change. Gideon realized that his son had been watching and learning from every decision he'd made over the past 5 years, absorbing lessons about resilience and compassion that were now emerging in this crucial moment. "Tyler's right," Gideon said, reaching for his phone. "Plans are good, but people are better. And right now, you have people." As he dialed Sandra's number, Gideon caught sight of himself in the hallway mirror and barely recognized the man looking back at him. For 5 years, he'd been focused on maintaining control, protecting what he had, and avoiding the kind of emotional risks that could lead to loss and disappointment. But in the space of 30 minutes, he'd invited a complete stranger into his home, enlisted his son as a medical assistant, and committed himself to helping deliver a baby. The transformation felt both terrifying and liberating. All the careful boundaries he'd constructed were crumbling, replaced by something that felt more authentic to who he'd been before grief and abandonment had taught him to be cautious. This was the man who'd run toward burning buildings, who'd marry his high school sweetheart despite everyone saying they were too young, who'd taken over the family business because it needed someone who cared about more than just profit. "Sandra," he said when the call connected, "it's Gideon. I need your help. I have a woman here who's about 34 weeks pregnant, and I think she's in labor." As he described the situation to Sandra, Gideon watched Tyler continue to comfort Elodie, offering her small sips of water and talking quietly about everything except the obvious medical crisis unfolding. The boy's natural empathy was emerging in ways that made Gideon realize how much Tyler had been holding back, protecting himself from caring too much about people who might leave. But tonight, faced with someone who genuinely needed help, Tyler was letting his guard down and revealing the compassionate, capable young man he was becoming. Watching his son rise to meet this unexpected challenge, Gideon understood that his protective approach over the past 5 years might have been shielding Tyler from potential hurt, but it had also been preventing him from discovering his own capacity for making a difference in other people's lives. "Sandra's on her way," Gideon announced after ending the call. "She's bringing medical supplies and enough experience to handle whatever happens tonight." "Thank you," Elodie whispered, reaching out to grip both Gideon's and Tyler's hands. "I don't understand why you're doing this for a stranger, but thank you." "You're not a stranger anymore," Tyler said with simple certainty. "You're someone who needed help, and we helped. That makes you family." As another contraction began to build, Gideon realized that Tyler had just articulated something profound about how families are actually formed, not through careful planning and risk assessment, but through showing up for each other when it matters most. Tonight, in their living room, a new kind of family was being born along with Elodie's baby, built on the foundation of crisis, compassion, and the willingness to extend themselves beyond their comfortable boundaries. Whatever happened next, Gideon knew that this night had already changed them all in ways that couldn't be undone. The question was no longer whether they should have gotten involved, but how far they were willing to go to ensure that the story unfolding in their living room had the best possible ending. Sandra Martinez arrived with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 15 years responding to medical emergencies. She swept into the house carrying a large medical bag and an air of calm competence that immediately reduced the tension in the room. At 45, Sandra had seen enough births to know when a situation was manageable and when it required immediate hospital intervention. "Gideon Stone, what have you gotten yourself into this time?" she asked with fond exasperation, though her eyes were already assessing Elodie's condition. "And you must be our mama-to-be." "I'm Sandra Martinez, registered nurse and apparently tonight's midwife." Elodie managed a weak smile between contractions. "Staff Sergeant Elodie Vance, and I'm really sorry about this. I know it's not exactly a normal Thursday evening." "Honey, normal is overrated," Sandra replied, snapping on surgical gloves. "Tyler, I need you to boil some water and find me the cleanest towels in the house. Gideon, help me get her comfortable. And let's see how far along we are." What followed was 3 hours of controlled chaos that transformed Gideon's living room into an impromptu delivery suite. Sandra's medical expertise combined with Tyler's eager assistance and Gideon's steady presence created an unexpectedly competent team. Through it all, Elodie displayed the kind of stoic determination that Gideon associated with military training, breathing through contractions with focused intensity and following Sandra's instructions without complaint. "Tell me about your family," Sandra said during a lull between contractions, clearly trying to keep Elodie's mind occupied. "Anyone we should call when the baby arrives?" Elodie's expression darkened slightly. "Not really. My sister in Oregon maybe, but we're not that close. My parents. They weren't exactly supportive when I told them about the pregnancy. Sighed I was ruining my career and my life." "What about the baby's father?" Sandra asked gently. "He made it clear that fatherhood wasn't in his plans," Elodie replied with bitter humor. "Turned out his idea of supporting the troops didn't extend to supporting the consequences of supporting the troops, if you know what I mean." Tyler, who had been quietly organizing medical supplies, looked up with the direct honesty that only 12-year-olds could manage. "That sounds like what my mom did to us. Some people just aren't brave enough to stay when things get complicated." The observation hung in the air, carrying more wisdom than anyone expected from someone Tyler's age. Gideon felt a surge of pride at his son's empathy, and he noticed that Elodie seemed to find genuine comfort in Tyler's matter-of-fact acceptance of abandonment as something that happened to good people through no fault of their own. "You're pretty smart for a kid," Elodie told Tyler. "Your dad's lucky to have you." "We're lucky to have each other," Tyler corrected. "And tonight, you're lucky to have us too." As the labor progressed, Gideon found himself marveling at how naturally The three of them had fallen into supporting Elodie through this most intimate and vulnerable experience. Sandra provided the medical expertise. Tyler offered emotional support with an innocence that somehow made everything less frightening. And Gideon found himself becoming the steady anchor that held everything together. At 2:17 a.m., after a final push that left Elodie exhausted but triumphant, Sandra lifted a tiny, perfect baby boy into the world. The infant's cry filled the living room, strong and healthy despite his early arrival, and Gideon felt tears streaming down his face as he watched this miracle unfold in his own home. "He's beautiful," Sandra announced, quickly cleaning the baby and wrapping him in one of Gideon's softest towels. 6 pounds 2 ounces by my estimation, and definitely ready to make his presence known. Elodie reached for her son with shaking hands, tears of relief and joy mixing on her cheeks. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mama, and these are the people who helped bring you safely into the world." Tyler leaned in close, his eyes wide with wonder. He's so small, but he looks strong, like he's going to grow up to do important things. "What are you going to name him?" Gideon asked, feeling an unexpected emotional connection to this child whose birth he'd witnessed and helped facilitate. "James," Elodie said without hesitation. "James Alexander Vance. It was my grandfather's name." He was someone who believed in doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. As dawn began to break outside, Sandra finished her medical checks and pronounced both mother and baby healthy. "You'll want to get them to a proper hospital for follow-up care within the next day or two," she told Gideon. But for an emergency home birth, this went about as well as anyone could hope. The peaceful aftermath was interrupted by the sound of vehicles pulling into Gideon's driveway, multiple cars with government license plates and the kind of subdued urgency that suggested official business. Through the window, Gideon could see men in dark suits conferring quietly near their cars. Elodie's entire demeanor changed instantly. The relaxed exhaustion of new motherhood was replaced by alert tension, and she clutched baby James protectively against her chest. "They found me," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "Who found you?" Gideon asked, moving protectively closer to Elodie and Tyler. "It's complicated," Elodie said, her military bearing returning despite her vulnerable state. "There are people who have been monitoring my situation since I left the service. I thought I had more time before they tracked me down." The doorbell rang, followed by authoritative knocking. "Ms. Vance?" A man's voice called through the door. "We're here to provide assistance and transportation. We know about the baby." Elodie closed her eyes, seeming to gather herself for whatever came next. "I have to go with them," she told Gideon. "I don't have a choice." "You don't have to do anything," Gideon said firmly. "This is my house, and you're my guest. No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go." "You don't understand," Elodie replied, though her voice carried gratitude for his protective instinct. "These aren't bad people. They're here to help, but their help comes with conditions, requirements." Tyler, who had been watching the exchange with growing concern, suddenly spoke up. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" "Because if you are, Dad, and I can help, we're good at helping people." Elodie's expression softened as she looked at Tyler's earnest face. "You already have helped, more than you know. But there are some things that 12-year-old boys and their dads can't fix, no matter how good their intentions are." Sandra, who had been quietly observing the situation, moved to the window and peered out at the government vehicles. "Those are federal plates," she said quietly. "Whatever this is about, it's bigger than local law enforcement." The knocking continued, more insistent now. "Ms. Vance, we need to speak with you. We have medical personnel standing by, and arrangements have been made for your care and the baby's care." Elodie stood slowly, still holding James, and moved toward her small duffel bag. From an inner pocket, she pulled out what appeared to be an official military document, and a small silver locket on a delicate chain. "Gideon," she said, pressing the locket into his hand, "I want you to have this. It belonged to my grandmother, but I want James to have it someday. When he's older, when he understands. Tell him about tonight. Tell him about the people who helped bring him into the world." "You can tell him yourself," Gideon protested. "You don't have to go anywhere. We can figure this out together." "I wish that were true," Elodie replied, leaning up to kiss his cheek. "But some circumstances are bigger than individual choices. Just remember us, okay? Remember this night and what it meant." She knelt down to Tyler's level, baby James still cradled in her arms. "Thank you for taking care of me tonight. You're going to grow up to be an extraordinary man, just like your father." "Will we see you again?" Tyler asked, his voice small and uncertain. "I hope so," Elodie said. "But if we don't, I want you to know that meeting you and your dad was the best thing that happened during the scariest night of my life." The front door opened, and two men in suits entered, followed by a woman in medical scrubs carrying what appeared to be a portable incubator. Their movements were efficient but respectful, clearly designed to minimize disruption while accomplishing their objective. "Miss Vance," the lead agent said, his tone formal but not unkind, "we've been authorized to provide immediate medical care and transportation to a secure facility where you and the baby will be safe." "Safe from what?" Gideon demanded, stepping protectively between the agents and Elodie. "From public attention that could compromise both Miss Vance's privacy and her son's future security," the agent replied. "There are circumstances surrounding this situation that require discretion." Elodie placed a gentle hand on Gideon's arm. "It's okay," she told him. "I knew this day would come. I just hoped I'd have more time to prepare." As the medical team began preparing James for transport, Elodie turned back to Gideon one final time. "The document I gave you," she said quietly. "Keep it safe. Someday, it might be important for James to have it." Gideon looked down at the official paper in his hand. It appeared to be some kind of military service record, with several official seals and signatures. The header read, "Classified Personnel File," but the rest was difficult to make out in the dim light. "Elodie," he said urgently, "what aren't you telling me? Who is James's father? Why are federal agents involved in this?" But she was already being escorted toward the door, baby James secured in the portable incubator. "Take care of yourselves," she called back. "And remember, sometimes the most important people in our lives are the ones who show up when we need them most." And then they were gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of baby powder and the profound silence that follows life-changing events. Gideon stood in his living room, holding a silver locket and a classified document, trying to process what had just happened. Tyler moved to stand beside his father, both of them staring at the door through which their unexpected guests had disappeared. "Dad," Tyler said quietly, "I think we just helped deliver someone really important." Gideon nodded, fingering the locket and wondering what secrets it contained. Outside, the government vehicles were already pulling away, carrying Elodie and baby James toward whatever future awaited them. But in his hand, Gideon held tangible proof that this night had been real, and that somewhere in the world, a little boy named James Alexander Vance would grow up knowing that he'd been born into a world where strangers could become family in a single evening. As Sandra began cleaning up the medical supplies, Gideon realized that his carefully controlled life had been permanently altered by 3 hours of labor and a woman whose story was clearly much more complicated than anything she'd been able to share. The locket felt warm in his palm, and the classified document seemed to pulse with unspoken significance. Whatever secrets Elodie was protecting, whatever circumstances had brought federal agents to his door at dawn, Gideon knew that this night would echo through their lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. All he could do was honor her request to remember, and hope that someday the truth would become clear. 18 months passed before Gideon learned the truth about Elodie Vance and her son James. In that time, life in Oakville had settled back into its familiar rhythms, though both Gideon and Tyler found themselves changed by their brief encounter with mystery and federal intrigue. The silver locket sat in Gideon's dresser drawer, polished monthly but never worn, while the classified document remained locked in his office safe, waiting for the day when its significance might become clear. Tyler, now 14 and taller than his father had expected, had developed an intense interest in current events and politics. The night of James's birth had awakened something in him, a sense that ordinary people could find themselves connected to extraordinary circumstances, and that understanding the larger world was essential for navigating unexpected situations. "Dad, did you see this?" Tyler called from the living room on a crisp March morning, his voice carrying unusual excitement. He was holding the newspaper, pointing to a headline that made Gideon's coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips. "President's son announces engagement to war hero Marine." Below the headline was a photograph that stopped Gideon's heart. Elodie Vance, looking radiant in an elegant dress, stood beside a man Gideon recognized as David Harrison Jr., the president's eldest son. But it was the toddler in Elodie's arms that made everything click into place. A beautiful little boy with dark hair and intelligent eyes, who looked exactly like the infant Gideon had helped bring into the world. "That's her," Tyler said with absolute certainty. "That's Elodie, and that's baby James. Dad, we delivered the president's grandson." Gideon sank into his chair, the newspaper shaking in his hands as he read the article. The story explained that Elodie Vance, a decorated Marine who had received the Purple Heart for injuries sustained while saving her unit from an IED attack, had met David Harrison Jr. through a veteran support organization. Their romance had been kept private due to security concerns, but they were now announcing their engagement and David's adoption of Elodie's son, James. The article included biographical details that filled in many gaps from that night 18 months ago. Elodie had been medically discharged from the Marines after her injuries and had been living under federal protection due to threats related to her war service. Her pregnancy had been the result of a relationship with a fellow Marine who had been killed in action, though the article diplomatically avoided those specific details. The couple plans to marry this summer, the article concluded, in a private ceremony at the family's estate. Young James, who will officially become James Alexander Harrison following the adoption, is said to be the joy of his grandfather's life, with the president frequently referring to him as the future of the Harrison family legacy. Gideon set down the newspaper with trembling hands, the full magnitude of that night finally becoming clear. They hadn't just helped deliver any baby, they had brought the future president's grandson into the world in their living room, with nothing but towels and determination, and Sandra's medical expertise. "We need to call Sandra," Tyler said immediately. "She's not going to believe this." But before Gideon could respond, the doorbell rang. Standing on his front porch was a woman in an expensive coat, holding an enormous flower arrangement and wearing the kind of smile that suggested she brought good news. "Mr. Stone? I'm Catherine Walsh from the Harrison family office. I'm here on behalf of Ms. Vancewell. She'll be Mrs. Harrison soon, to express the family's gratitude and to arrange a meeting." Gideon stared at the woman, still processing the morning's revelations. "A meeting? Elodie has spoken of you and Tyler frequently over the past 18 months, Catherine explained. "She's been waiting for the appropriate time to reconnect, and the engagement announcement seems to have provided that opportunity. She'd very much like to see you both again, and to properly thank you for what you did that night." Tyler appeared beside his father, his eyes bright with excitement. "Is James okay? Is he healthy and happy?" Catherine's smile warmed considerably. "He's wonderful. Bright, energetic, and absolutely adored by everyone who meets him. Elodie says he has your father's steady temperament and your curiosity about how things work. When would this meeting happen?" Gideon asked, his practical nature reasserting itself despite the surreal circumstances. Would this weekend be possible? Elodie is staying at the Harrison family compound about 2 hours from here. It's very private and secure, but she's arranged for you to be cleared for a visit. She'd love to cook dinner for you apparently. She's learned quite a bit about cooking since leaving the military. Gideon found himself nodding before he'd fully processed the invitation. Yes, we'd like that very much. Excellent. I'll send a car on Saturday at noon. And Mr. Stone? Catherine paused, her expression becoming more serious. Elodie asked me to tell you that everything you did that night, everything you risked. For a stranger, it mattered more than you could possibly know. Not just for her and James, but for all of us. After Catherine left, Gideon and Tyler sat in their living room, staring at the newspaper photograph and trying to absorb the reality of their situation. The quiet gas station owner and his teenage son were apparently significant enough figures in the future first family's life to warrant personal security clearances and dinner invitations. "Dad," Tyler said finally, "do you think our lives are about to change again?" Gideon considered the question seriously. The past 18 months had been peaceful, productive, and exactly the kind of stable existence he'd worked to create for Tyler. But looking at the photograph of Elodie and James, he realized that some connections transcend ordinary considerations of stability and safety. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know that we're going to find out what happened to them, and that feels important." Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth and clear skies. The car that came for them was understated but luxurious, with a professional driver who treated them with respectful courtesy. During the 2-hour drive through increasingly affluent neighborhoods, Tyler peppered the driver with questions about security protocols and presidential family procedures, displaying the kind of intellectual curiosity that made Gideon proud, and slightly worried about what interests this connection might awaken in his son. The Harrison family compound was both more and less impressive than Gideon had expected. The estate was clearly expensive and carefully maintained, but it felt like a home rather than a fortress. Children's toys were scattered across the front lawn, and the sound of laughter drifted from the backyard as their car pulled into the circular driveway. Elodie met them at the front door, and Gideon was struck by how much she'd changed since that desperate night at his gas station. The exhausted, frightened young woman had been replaced by someone who radiated confidence and contentment. She was still recognizably the same person, but she seemed to have found a version of herself that had been hidden under layers of stress and uncertainty. "Gideon, Tyler," she hugged them both with genuine warmth. "I can't tell you how many times I've thought about this moment, how many times I've wanted to call you and explain everything." "You look happy," Tyler observed with his characteristic directness, "really happy, not just pretend happy." Elodie laughed, the sound free and unguarded. "I am happy. Happier than I thought possible. And a lot of that started with the kindness you two showed me when I had nowhere else to turn." James appeared around the corner, no longer the tiny infant they remembered, but a sturdy, bright-eyed toddler who regarded the visitors with curious interest. He was beautiful, clearly healthy and well cared for, and there was something about his alert expression that reminded Gideon of Tyler at that age. "James," Elodie said, kneeling to his level, "these are the friends I told you about. This is Mr. Gideon and Tyler, the ones who helped when you were born." James studied them solemnly for a moment, then walked directly to Tyler and held up his arms to be picked up. Tyler, who had limited experience with small children but abundant natural gentleness, lifted James carefully and was immediately rewarded with a smile that lit up the entire room. "He remembers us," Tyler said with wonder. "He actually remembers." "I don't think it's memory exactly," Elodie replied, watching James settle comfortably in Tyler's arms. "But I think some connections are deeper than memory. I think he recognizes the people who were there at the beginning." As they moved into the house, Gideon was introduced to David Harrison Jr., who turned out to be everything Gideon had hoped he would be: genuinely kind, clearly devoted to both Elodie and James, and possessed of the sort of easy confidence that came from a lifetime of being raised to serve others rather than simply being served. "I've heard so much about that night," David said, shaking Gideon's hand with obvious respect. "What you did for Elodie and James, opening your home to a stranger in crisis. It says everything about who you are as people." "Anyone would have done the same thing," Gideon replied, though he knew that wasn't entirely true. "No," David said seriously. "Not everyone would have. And that's what makes what you did special." The afternoon unfolded with surprising naturalness. Despite the obvious wealth and security surrounding them, Elodie and David had created a home environment that felt warm and unpretentious. James delighted in showing Tyler his toys and books, and Tyler responded with the kind of patient attention that made Gideon realize his son would probably be an excellent father someday. Over dinner, which Elodie had indeed prepared herself with considerable skill, the adults talked about everything from current events to parenting challenges to the adjustments required when private family moments become matters of national security. Throughout the conversation, Gideon was struck by how normal everything felt, despite the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. "I have something for you," Elodie said as the evening wound down. She disappeared into another room and returned with a small wrapped package. "I know you kept the locket I gave you that night. This is something to go with it." Inside the package was a silver frame containing a photograph, the four of them from earlier that day, with James in Tyler's arms and all of them laughing at something David had said. But it was the inscription on the frame that made Gideon's throat tighten with emotion. "For Gideon and Tyler Stone, who showed us that family isn't just about blood. It's about being there when it matters most. With love and eternal gratitude, Elodie, David, and James." "There's something else," Elodie added, her voice becoming more serious. "David and I have talked about this extensively, and we'd like James to know Tyler as he grows up. Not for publicity or political reasons, but because Tyler was there the night James was born, and that creates a bond that we don't want James to lose." She looked directly at Gideon. "We'd like Tyler to be James's big brother, officially. Not legally, we know that's complicated, but in all the ways that matter. Birthday parties, family gatherings, someone James can call when he needs advice from someone who isn't his parents." Tyler's eyes went wide. "You want me to be his big brother?" "We want you to be his family," David said simply. "The way you already became family that night when he was born." As they drove home that evening, both Gideon and Tyler were quiet, processing the day's revelations and invitations. The silver frame sat carefully secured between them, and Gideon found himself thinking about the unexpected ways that single acts of kindness could ripple through time and create connections that transcended ordinary social boundaries. "Dad," Tyler said finally, "I think we're going to be part of something really important." Gideon nodded, understanding that his son wasn't talking about the political implications of their connection to the Harrison family, but about the deeper significance of being trusted with a role in James's life and development. "Are you okay with that?" Gideon asked. "I think it's what we're supposed to do," Tyler replied with the quiet certainty that had characterized his response to crisis since he was 7 years old. "Help people. Be there for family. Make sure James grows up knowing that there are people he can count on." As they turned into their driveway in Oakville, Gideon realized that their small, carefully constructed life was about to expand in ways he'd never imagined. But looking at Tyler's excited expression and remembering James's comfortable acceptance of their presence, he found himself looking forward to the expansion rather than fearing it. Some changes, he thought, were worth the risk. The months following their reunion fell into a rhythm that surprised Gideon with its naturalness. What had begun as an extraordinary circumstance gradually became an integral part of their lives. woven into the fabric of their days with the seamless integration that characterizes genuine family relationships. Every other weekend, Tyler would take the train to spend Saturday and Sunday at the Harrison compound, returning home Sunday evening with stories about James's latest developmental milestones and adventures. The visits had started as something of an experiment with everyone, cautiously optimistic but uncertain about how sustainable the arrangement would be. Instead, Tyler had proven to be exactly the kind of big brother James needed, patient enough to read the same story 5 times in a row, energetic enough to keep up with a toddler's boundless curiosity, and mature enough to handle the unique challenges of being part of a family constantly under public scrutiny. James said his first complete sentence today, Tyler announced one Sunday evening, barely containing his excitement as Gideon picked him up from the train station. He said, "Tyler, come back soon." And Elodie said he's been practicing it all week. All week. Gideon smiled, noting how naturally Tyler had shifted into the role of protective older sibling. The boy who had been cautious about emotional attachments for years was now completely invested in James's welfare and development, calling during the week to check on him and planning activities for their next visit together. The relationship had evolved beyond the initial gratitude that motivated Elodie's reconnection. Both families had discovered that they genuinely enjoyed each other's company, and that the circumstances of James's birth had created a foundation for friendship that transcended their very different social circumstances. Elodie had proven to be surprisingly down-to-earth despite her engagement to the president's son. She called Gideon regularly, sometimes to discuss practical parenting questions. She valued his experience as a single father navigating the challenges of raising a thoughtful, intelligent boy, and sometimes simply to maintain the connection that had become important to all of them. James keeps asking when he can visit Oakville and see the gas station where Tyler lives, Elodie told Gideon during one of their weekly phone conversations. He has this idea that Tyler's house is the most exciting place in the world because it's where he was born. He's welcome anytime, Gideon replied, though they both understood the security complications that made such visits challenging. Tyler would love to show him around town, introduce him to Sandra, maybe teach him how to check tire pressure. The limitations imposed by James's security needs had required creative solutions for maintaining their relationship. Video calls had become a regular feature of Tyler's evening routine, with James insisting on saying goodnight to his big brother Tyler before bedtime. During these calls, Tyler would read stories, help James practice counting, or simply listen as the toddler chattered about his day. David Harrison Jr. had exceeded Gideon's expectations in every way. Despite his privileged background and demanding career in public service, David had embraced his role as James's father with genuine dedication and surprising humility. He frequently sought Gideon's advice about parenting decisions, treating him as an experienced mentor rather than a social subordinate. "You raised Tyler to be thoughtful and confident without being entitled," David told Gideon during one of their conversations. "That's exactly the kind of man I want James to become. You've given us a blueprint for how to do it right." The praise was gratifying, but more importantly, Gideon appreciated David's recognition that effective parenting transcended economic circumstances. The lessons about integrity, empathy, and resilience that Gideon had tried to instill in Tyler were equally valuable in preparing James for a life of public service and scrutiny. Elodie's wedding planning had become a source of both excitement and anxiety for the extended family they'd created. The ceremony would be small and private, but Elodie had asked Tyler to serve as James's escort down the aisle, a role that thrilled Tyler while also making him nervous about the responsibility. "What if I drop him?" Tyler worried during one of their evening conversations about the upcoming wedding. "What if he gets scared and starts crying? What if I mess up in front of the president?" "You've been taking care of James for months," Gideon reminded him. He trusts you completely. And if something unexpected happens, you'll handle it the same way you always do, calmly and competently. The wedding had also prompted discussions about the future of their relationship and what role Gideon and Tyler would play in the Harrison family's life long term. The initial connection born from crisis had evolved into something more substantial, but the practical challenges of maintaining close relationships across such different worlds required ongoing negotiation and adaptation. "I don't want you to feel obligated to maintain this connection," Gideon told Elodie during one of their more serious conversations. "Tyler and I care about you and James tremendously, but we understand that your lives are complicated in ways ours aren't. That's exactly why this relationship is so important," Elodie replied. "James needs people in his life who aren't part of the political world, who can help him understand that there's value and dignity in all kinds of work and service. Tyler shows him that intelligence and kindness matter more than social status or wealth." The sentiment was mutual. Tyler had benefited enormously from his exposure to the Harrison family's world of public service and global awareness. His perspective on current events had become more sophisticated, and his academic performance had improved as he discovered that the knowledge he gained in school connected to real-world issues that affected people he cared about. James asked me today why some people don't like his grandpa, Tyler told Gideon after returning from one weekend visit. "I didn't know what to tell him." "What did you say?" Gideon asked, curious about how Tyler had navigated such a complex question. "I told him that being president means making decisions that some people agree with and some people don't, but that the most important thing is trying to do what's right for everyone, even when it's hard," Tyler replied. "Then I told him that his grandpa loves him, and that's what matters most in families." Gideon was continually impressed by Tyler's emotional maturity and his ability to help James process the unique challenges of growing up in a political family. The boy who had once been wary of emotional investment was now completely committed to being the kind of big brother who could provide both fun and guidance. The practical aspects of their expanding family had required adjustments to Gideon's business and personal routine. Weekend trips to visit James meant arranging coverage at the gas station, and the security protocols surrounding their visits required a level of planning that was foreign to their normally spontaneous lifestyle. But Sandra Martinez, who had been let in on the secret of James's identity after signing an impressive array of confidentiality agreements, had proven invaluable in helping manage both the medical follow-up care for James and the scheduling challenges created by their new family commitments. "I always knew that baby was special," Sandra told Gideon with satisfaction. "The way he looked around that night, like he was taking inventory of everyone who was there. I've delivered a lot of babies, and I've never seen one who seemed so aware of what was happening around him." The security detail assigned to monitor James's well-being had initially made Gideon nervous, but the agents had proven to be professional and unobtrusive. Their presence was a reminder of the extraordinary circumstances surrounding James's future, but they'd been careful not to interfere with the natural development of family relationships. As spring turned to summer and the wedding approached, Gideon found himself reflecting on how dramatically his life had changed since that October night when Elodie's car had broken down at his gas station. The careful boundaries he'd constructed around his heart had been thoroughly demolished, replaced by a network of relationships that felt both more complex and more fulfilling than anything he'd experienced since Sarah's departure. Tyler had thrived in his role as big brother, developing a confidence and sense of purpose that extended far beyond his relationship with James. His grades had improved, his social interactions at school had become more natural, and his conversations about the future reflected a broader understanding of the possibilities available to him. "I've been thinking about what I want to study in college," Tyler told Gideon one evening as they worked together in the gas station's office. "Maybe political science or international relations. I want to understand how government works so I can help James when he's older and has to deal with all that stuff. The casual assumption that Tyler would be part of James's life for years to come warmed Gideon's heart while also making him aware of how much their own future had become intertwined with the Harrison family's trajectory. They were no longer just witnesses to James's story. They'd become essential characters in whatever narrative was still unfolding. Elodie's happiness had become increasingly evident as her wedding day approached. The stressed, frightened young woman who had arrived at his gas station had been replaced by someone who radiated contentment and confidence. Her love for David was obvious, but equally apparent was her gratitude for the stability and security that their relationship provided. For James, "I never thought I'd have this," she confided to Gideon during one of their phone conversations. "A man who loves both me and James unconditionally. A family that accepts us completely. And friends like you and Tyler, who remind us that the most important relationships are built on genuine care rather than political advantage." As the summer wedding approached, Gideon realized that he was no longer the same man who had been focused solely on protecting Tyler from potential emotional risks. The expansion of their family had required him to embrace uncertainty and vulnerability, but it had also provided rewards that far exceeded anything he could have achieved through careful self-protection. Watching Tyler practice his wedding responsibilities, with James seeing the little boy's obvious love and trust for his big brother, Gideon understood that some risks were not just worth taking, they were essential for creating the kind of life that had meaning beyond mere survival and stability. The gas station that had once represented the boundaries of his world had become the foundation for connections that stretched far beyond Oakville, touching the highest levels of government and the most intimate moments of family life. And somehow, impossibly, it all felt exactly right. The crisis began with a single photograph published in a tabloid 3 weeks before Elodie and David's wedding. The image, grainy but unmistakable, showed Tyler carrying James across the Harrison compounds lawn while Gideon walked beside them, all three clearly comfortable and familiar with each other. The headline read, "First Family Secret, President's Grandson's Mysterious Big Brother Connection." Gideon first learned about the story when his phone started ringing at 5:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The caller was Catherine Walsh from the Harrison family office, her usually composed voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Mr. Stone, I'm calling to warn you that you're about to receive significant media attention," Catherine said. Without preamble, "Someone has leaked photographs and information about your relationship with the family. We're working to contain the situation, but I wanted you to be prepared." Within hours, news vans lined the street outside Stone's Gas and Go, and reporters had descended on Oakville like an invading army. Every customer who stopped for gas was questioned about Gideon and Tyler's character, their financial situation, and their connection to the Harrison family. The local diner became an impromptu media headquarters, with journalists offering increasingly large sums for exclusive interviews with anyone who knew the Stone family personally. Tyler, walking to school that morning, found himself surrounded by cameras and microphones thrust in his face. Tyler Stone. How long have you known the president's grandson? What's your relationship with the Harrison family? Are you being paid for your friendship?" The boy who had handled high-pressure situations with remarkable maturity found himself overwhelmed by the aggressive attention. He pushed through the crowd without commenting, but Gideon could see the strain in his son's face when he picked him up from school that afternoon. "They followed me everywhere," Tyler said quietly as they drove home past the assembled media circus. "During lunch, during classes, even to the bathroom. Mr. Patterson had to call security to get them off school property." That evening, the National News ran a segment titled, "The Gas Station Father and the Future President's Grandson," complete with helicopter footage of their modest home and detailed speculation about their unusual access to the Harrison family. The report painted their relationship in terms that made Gideon's skin crawl, suggesting that he was either being used for political purposes or was somehow exploiting his connection for personal gain. Sources close to the Harrison family question whether this relationship is appropriate. The anchor reported with practiced gravitas. Critics suggest that allowing the president's grandson unsupervised access to individuals without security clearance represents a potential vulnerability that could be exploited by hostile interests. The phone rang constantly. Reporters offered increasingly large sums for exclusive interviews, book deals, or television appearances. A producer from a major network called offering a six-figure contract for a documentary about their unique American family story. Every offer came with the implicit suggestion that their relationship with the Harrison family was a commodity to be packaged and sold rather than a genuine emotional connection. By the third day, the pressure had become unbearable. Tyler couldn't attend school without being harassed. Gideon couldn't run his business without constant interruption. And their phone had become unusable due to the volume of calls from reporters, producers, and people claiming to represent various interests. The breaking point came when a particularly aggressive journalist approached Sandra Martinez at the hospital where she worked, demanding details about the night James was born and offering substantial money for her cooperation. When Sandra refused and asked him to leave, he followed her to her car, filming the entire interaction for what he called a behind-the-scenes expose of the birthnight heroes. "This has to stop," Gideon told Elodie during an emergency phone call that evening. "They're following Tyler to school, harassing my employees, turning our entire lives into a circus. This isn't sustainable." "I know," Elodie replied, her voice heavy with guilt and frustration. "David's political team is saying the same thing. They're worried that the media attention is creating security risks and making us all vulnerable to people with bad intentions." The conversation that followed was the most difficult they'd had since reconnecting. David's advisors were recommending a temporary suspension of contact until after the wedding and the initial media frenzy died down. The Secret Service had expressed concerns about Tyler's continued access to James, without comprehensive background checks and security training. Even the president himself had been briefed on the situation and was reportedly questioning whether the relationship was worth the political complications it was creating. "They want us to disappear," Tyler said flatly after Gideon explained the situation. "They want us to pretend none of this ever happened, so their lives can go back to being perfect and private." "That's not what they want," Gideon protested, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed his own words. "They're trying to protect everyone involved by cutting us out," Tyler replied with bitter clarity that reminded Gideon how much his son had grown up over the past few months. "They're choosing their political careers over us, just like Mom chose her freedom over us." The comparison hit Gideon like a physical blow because it contained an uncomfortable grain of truth. The pattern was familiar, a relationship that seemed strong and genuine until external pressures made it inconvenient, followed by a gradual withdrawal that ended in abandonment, disguised as mutual agreement. That night, unable to sleep, Gideon found himself standing in Tyler's doorway, watching his son stare at the ceiling with the kind of weary resignation that no 14-year-old should have to feel. "Are you okay?" Gideon asked quietly. "I love James," Tyler said without turning toward his father. "I love being his big brother. I love helping him learn new words and showing him how things work and making him laugh. But maybe they're right. Maybe we don't belong in that world." Tyler ... "No, Dad, listen. Look what's happening to us. We can't live our normal lives anymore because reporters want to turn us into some kind of feel-good story. And James can't live his normal life because people are questioning whether it's safe for him to be around us." Tyler finally turned to face his father. Maybe the best thing we can do for him is step away. The next morning brought new complications. A political talk show had dedicated an entire segment to analyzing the security implications of the Harrison family's connection to unvetted civilians. A former intelligence official suggested that foreign agents could use people like Gideon and Tyler to gain information about the president's family routines and vulnerabilities. Most damaging was an editorial in a major newspaper questioning whether the Harrison family was using ordinary Americans as political props, and whether their connection to the Stone family was genuine or manufactured for public relations purposes. The timing of this revelation, just weeks before a high-profile wedding, suggests a carefully orchestrated campaign to humanize a family often criticized for being out of touch with ordinary Americans, the editorial read. The question voters should ask is whether this heartwarming story represents authentic relationships or cynical political theater. Reading the editorial over breakfast, Gideon felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of their situation. For the first time since that October night when Elodie's car had broken down, he found himself questioning whether their relationship with the Harrison family was as genuine as he'd believed, or whether they'd been unconsciously cast in roles designed to serve purposes they didn't fully understand. The doubt was poisonous because it retrospectively contaminated every positive moment they'd shared. Had Elodie's gratitude been real or calculated? Had David's respect for Gideon's parenting been sincere or strategic? Had Tyler's role as James's big brother been valued for its emotional authenticity, or for its symbolic value in humanizing a political family? When Elodie called that afternoon, her voice was strained with exhaustion and stress. David's campaign manager is recommending a complete separation until after the election cycle, she said without preamble. He says the media attention is creating too many complications and raising questions that could damage David's political future. What do you want? Gideon asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. I want what's best for James. Elodie replied after a long pause. And I'm not sure anymore what that is. The media is portraying our relationship as either exploitative or fake, and I don't know how to protect him from that narrative. So you want us to disappear? I want the circus to stop, Elodie said, her voice breaking slightly. I want James to be able to grow up without people questioning whether the people who love him are using him for their own purposes. I want Tyler to be able to go to school without being followed by cameras. I want you to be able to run your business without reporters camping in your parking lot. After the call ended, Gideon sat in his office staring at the silver-framed photograph from their reunion, trying to reconcile the happiness captured in that image with the political complications that same happiness had apparently created. Classified document Elodie had given him that first night remained locked in his safe, still unexamined, a symbol of secrets and connections he was perhaps never meant to fully understand. Tyler found him there an hour later, phone in hand and expression grim. I just got a text from James's nanny, he said. They're not taking him to the park anymore because reporters keep trying to approach him. And they canceled his playdate with the neighbor kids because their parents are being harassed for interviews. The final blow came in the form of a security assessment delivered by courier that evening. The document, stamped with official seals and classifications, recommended immediate cessation of unsecured contact between the Harrison family and unvetted civilians, pending comprehensive background investigations and security protocol implementation. The language was bureaucratic and impersonal, but the message was clear. Gideon and Tyler had become liabilities rather than assets, security risks rather than family members. Their relationship with James would be suspended indefinitely, pending investigations and protocols that might take months or years to complete. That night, for the first time since Sarah's departure, Gideon wondered if they'd been naive to believe that love and genuine connection could overcome the vast differences in their circumstances. The world of politics and power operated by rules he didn't understand. And perhaps Tyler had been right. They didn't belong in that world. no matter how much they loved the little boy who'd been born in their living room as he watched Tyler pack away the gifts he'd bought for James's upcoming birthday. Gideon realized they were facing the same choice that had defined his life since Sarah left. Protect themselves by retreating to the safety of their small world, or risk everything for relationships that might ultimately prove unsustainable. The only difference was that this time, the stakes were higher, and the potential loss felt like it might break them both. The phone call that changed everything came at 6 a.m. on a Friday morning, not from Catherine Walsh or David's campaign manager, but from President Harrison himself. Gideon, still groggy from another sleepless night, almost didn't answer the unfamiliar number, but something made him pick up on the fourth ring. "Mr. Stone, this is President William Harrison. I apologize for calling so early, but I wanted to speak with you before the day gets away from us both." Gideon sat up straight in bed, his mind racing to process the surreal reality of receiving a personal call from the President of the United States. "Mr. President, Yes, sir. Good morning. I've been following the media situation surrounding your family's relationship with my son and future daughter-in-law," President Harrison continued, his voice carrying the kind of authority that commanded attention while remaining genuinely warm. "I've also been watching how my grandson responds when people mention Tyler's name, and I've made a decision that I wanted to share with you directly." Gideon held his breath, expecting to hear an official termination of their relationship couched in diplomatic language about security concerns and political necessities. "Mr. Stone, in my 68 years on this earth, I've learned that the most important relationships are often the ones that cause us the most inconvenience," the president said. "Political advisors come and go. Campaign managers focus on next week's poll numbers. But authentic human connections, the kind that emerge from genuine care and mutual respect, those are rare and precious." The president paused, and Gideon could hear what sounded like papers rustling in the background. "I've read the complete file on the night James was born. I've reviewed security assessments, political risk analyses, and media impact reports. But, more importantly, I've spent time with my grandson, and I've seen how his face lights up when he talks about his big brother, Tyler. I've watched him practice reading so he can show Tyler his progress. I've heard him ask every day when Tyler is coming to visit." Gideon felt tears beginning to form as he realized where this conversation was heading. "Mr. Stone, some relationships are worth fighting for, regardless of the political cost. My grandson needs Tyler in his life, and from what I've observed, Tyler needs James just as much. I'm not going to let a pack of reporters and a group of nervous political consultants destroy something that genuine." "Mr. President," Gideon began, his voice thick with emotion, "we never wanted to cause problems for your family. If our relationship with James is creating political complications, every meaningful choice creates complications," President Harrison interrupted gently. "The question is whether those complications are worth the relationship they're protecting. In this case, the answer is absolutely yes." What followed was an invitation that neither Gideon nor Tyler could have imagined in their wildest dreams. President Harrison was personally inviting them to attend Elodie and David's wedding, not as secret guests hidden from public view, but as honored family members with full acknowledgement of their role in James's life. "I'm going to make a public statement this afternoon," the president explained. "I'm going to tell the American people that my grandson was born with the help of two extraordinary citizens who opened their home to a stranger in need. I'm going to explain that Tyler Stone has become James's big brother through choice rather than blood, and that this relationship represents the best of what America can be when we extend ourselves to help others." The statement, delivered from the Rose Garden that afternoon, became one of the most watched presidential addresses in recent memory. President Harrison, speaking without notes and with obvious emotion, told the complete story of James's birth and the relationship that had developed between the two families. Gideon Stone and his son Tyler represent the America I want my grandson to grow up understanding, the president said, looking directly into the cameras. They represent the values of service, compassion, and integrity that form the foundation of our democracy. The idea that we should hide or apologize for relationships built on those principles is fundamentally wrong. The president went further, announcing the establishment of the Tyler Stone Scholarship Fund, a program designed to support young people who demonstrated exceptional character and commitment to service, regardless of their economic circumstances or social background. Tyler Stone will be my grandson's big brother for life, President Harrison concluded. Not because it's politically convenient, but because some bonds transcend politics, and some relationships are more important than any temporary inconvenience they might create. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support for the president's defense of authentic relationships over political calculation. Editorial boards praised his willingness to prioritize family values over campaign strategy. Even political opponents acknowledged the courage required to take such a public stand on a personal matter. More importantly, the media circus that had made their lives unbearable suddenly shifted focus. Instead of invasive questions about their motivations and background, reporters began covering their story as an example of American values and authentic connection. The narrative changed from gas station owner exploits political connection to ordinary heroes embody the best of American character. Tyler's reaction to watching the president's statement was pure joy mixed with profound relief. He stood up for us, Tyler said with wonder. The President of the United States stood up for us because James needs his big brother. 2 weeks later, Tyler walked down the aisle at Elodie and David's wedding, carrying James with the kind of natural confidence that comes from knowing you belong exactly where you are. The ceremony was beautiful, but what struck Gideon most was how right everything felt, how Tyler and James moved together with the easy familiarity of siblings, how Elodie and David looked at them with genuine affection, and how President Harrison himself made a point of personally thanking both Gideon and Tyler for their role in his family's happiness. During the reception, James fell asleep in Tyler's arms, while Tyler told him a story about the gas station where he was born. Watching them together, Gideon realized that the relationship they'd feared losing had emerged stronger than ever, strengthened by its survival of public scrutiny and political pressure. "You know what I learned from all this?" Tyler said later, as they drove home from the wedding. "Sometimes fighting for something proves how much it's worth. If we'd given up when things got hard, we would have lost something irreplaceable." 5 years later, Tyler Stone graduated as valedictorian of his high school class, with James Harrison, now 7 years old, and Tyler's constant weekend companion sitting in the front row cheering louder than anyone else. Tyler's graduation speech focused on the importance of chosen family and the courage required to maintain authentic relationships in a world that often prioritized convenience over connection. Tyler went on to study political science at Georgetown University, with a full scholarship from the Tyler Stone Scholarship Fund that President Harrison had established. His senior thesis, titled "The Role of Authentic Relationships in Public Service," was published in the university's Political Review and cited by scholars studying the intersection of personal connections and public policy. James, now a confident and compassionate young boy, split his time between the sophisticated world of Washington politics and the small-town values of Oakville. He could discuss international relations with the same enthusiasm he brought to helping Gideon tune up cars at the gas station. His unique perspective, grounded in both privilege and humility, security and service, was already showing signs of the leadership qualities that would serve him well in whatever future he chose to pursue. Gideon, approaching 50, had expanded Stone's Gas and Go into a regional chain while maintaining the personal service and community focus that had always defined the business. He'd never remarried, finding complete fulfillment in his role as Tyler's father, James's unofficial grandfather, and the patriarch of a family that had been created through crisis and sustained through choice. On quiet evenings, when Tyler was home from college and James was visiting for the weekend, Gideon would sometimes sit on his front porch and reflect on the night that had changed everything. The silver locket that Elodie had given him still sat in his dresser drawer, now accompanied by photographs spanning years of birthday parties, graduations, holidays, and quiet family moments. The classified document she'd left behind had eventually been explained. It contained James's complete family history, including details about his biological father's military service and the security considerations that had initially surrounded Elodie's pregnancy. But by the time those secrets were revealed, they'd become simply interesting historical details about how their family had come to be, rather than mysterious complications to be solved. What mattered wasn't the political significance of their connection, but the daily reality of love, support, and mutual care that had grown from a single act of kindness on a dark October night. Tyler and James were brothers in every way that mattered. Gideon and Elodie had become family not through marriage or blood, but through the deeper bond of shared purpose and mutual respect. Sometimes the most profound connections truly are born in moments when strangers become saviors, and a single act of courage can rewrite incomplete stories into something whole and lasting. In a gas station parking lot in Oakville, during a crisis that could have ended in tragedy, 4 lives had intersected to create something extraordinary, a family built on choice, sustained by love, and strong enough to survive whatever challenges the future might bring. As President Harrison had said in his Rose Garden address, some relationships are worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. And sometimes, when you choose to fight for love over convenience, for authenticity over safety, and for connection over isolation, you discover that the most important victories are the ones that can't be measured in polls or calculated in political advantage. They are measured instead in the laughter of children who know they are loved, in the pride of young men who understand their worth, and in the quiet satisfaction of adults who chose to extend themselves beyond their comfort zones and found that the expansion made room for more joy than they'd ever imagined possible. Future President's grandson had been born in a living room in Oakville, surrounded by love and brought into the world by people who understood that family is something you build through showing up when it matters most. And that, perhaps, was the most important lesson any future leader could learn. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.